Good evening, sir. Good evening, participants. Welcome to day 4 of the Strategic Insight Series online bootcamp titled From Code to Consensus AI and its Role in Shaping Global Narratives, organized by IFPD in collaboration with Global Policy Insights and Insights International. The speaker for today is Mr. Abhivardhan, who will be taking the session on algorithmic bias and ethical dilemmas in AI driven diplomacy. This session will explore the ethical challenges and risk of algorithmic bias in AI driven diplomacy. The speaker will discuss how biased AI systems can affect international relations and decision making, and emphasize the need for transparency, fairness, and accountability in the use of AI in diplomatic contexts. Sir is a technology law and AI governance specialist, advising technology teams and professionals on ethical, responsible, and explainable use of artificial intelligence technologies. He is the founder and chairperson of the Indian Society of Artificial Intelligence and Law, ISAIL, and serves as a managing partner at Indic Pacific Legal Research LLP. Sir is a member of the Indo-Pacific Circle and was the founding member of the International Law and Technology Interest Group at the European Society of International Law. He has authorized influential works, including Artificial Intelligence, Ethics and International Law, and India's first privately proposed AI regulation, AIACT.in. Sir's interest spans technology law, AI governance, Indo-Pacific studies, India-US relations, and digital competition law, contributing to various esteemed publications in these fields. Such an honor to have you here. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks for the delightful introduction, Arsh. And uh, I think I'm revisiting the topic of AI and diplomacy today after a long time. I think because I've followed this nexus, this very small nexus, before the GPT hype, before the AI hype since 2020. So it would be great to discuss this and uh, have, I would say, an inclusive conversation where I just don't lecture and people also ask some questions. So I would really appreciate, whenever people ask questions. I mean, in terms of typing, I think that would be great because I'll discuss some aspects and I'll share my slide. But I think let me first share my screen so that it would be confirmed if this is visible. So yeah, I hope my slide is visible for everyone.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So I think my introduction has been decently given. I'm somebody who is a technology law specialist, but at the same time, I love AI because I try to understand it as a technology and not as something which is just an abstract idea. And when you study things like these in a rooted way and you engage with stakeholders who make sense, I think you come to know a lot and you are humbled by how exactly can you be helpful from a legal and policy standpoint. Because I think there is a lot of AI beyond generative AI, and I think that AI also will be helpful in diplomacy. Uh, that being said, of course, quick introduction of what is ISIL since that has been introduced in my introduction, but I think that's not the main aspect of this discussion. The main purpose that I am interested in discussing is basically about the overlap of governance and diplomatic ethics dilemmas and how AI biases truly cause problems. Now, uh, to be very clear and to be honest, I think the perspective of bias has to be dealt very carefully because we think that it's just about some socio-economic bias and you know algorithmic techniques not behaving reasonably. But I think bias itself, I think, can be also capitulated in a different way. For example, AI biases contribute a lot in a B2C scenario. Like some AI generated photo comes up which stereotypes Indian people, you know, maybe from southern side or northern side, or sometimes it stereotypes even Europeans. Like, for example, and that created a controversy, but I'll not, I mean, it's nothing controversial to say. So last year, I think so it was not related to India, but what happened is that Gemini created a photo of a soldier from Germany under Adolf Hitler. Ironically, it should have been a white Caucasian male. Turns out it was some African guy, and Gemini had generated that photo. So turns out that AI biases have a very weird impact that you can't even depict history in a reasonable way, or you can't even depict certain things in a reasonable way, which they should be done. And then you create an impugned bias, which is so fun. So I think AI bias has two elements. First is the technical element, what exactly causes bias, the data itself, and those things. And then after that, sometimes it's also about the ecosystem, which I will definitely discuss about, which is basically an acronym called WEIRD, WEIRD. I'll discuss that. Um, but yeah, let's take it forward as the slide is visible. So these are the 6 topics I intend to discuss, and I wish to keep it interesting. So I will definitely discuss what these concepts are. So first, I think we need to understand what the nexus of AI and diplomacy is. Then we can talk about technology practices because I don't think we focus on technology practices, be it business communities or policy communities, and be it legal communities. And I think that's a huge concern right now. The third element, which I find quite interesting, is international algorithmic law. And there's a question mark for a reason because it's a concept which I created in 2020 and it has been proposed some time back. But there have been some similar literature which has come up from policy organizations and research firms and even think tanks and others. And there is some genuine literature across Europe, Singapore, and other places, and the United States also, which and even China for that matter. So I'll discuss what is international algorithmic law. It's not similar to that, but it's kind of relatable to it. And then, of course, there are 3 aspects which I highlighted in my LinkedIn post when I discussed about this event, this session. That first, if we commercialize AI technology, which is already happening, nobody's stopping it, and nobody should stop it directly. Uh, does it change the way public diplomacy works? Yes, because public diplomacy is very important for diplomatic communities to engage with each other. These days, in the age of soft power, people to people ties, business to business ties matter a lot. One small controversy, one small communication problem, one small bias in terms of understanding people. It might be driven by algorithms, it might be driven by some algorithmic aspect. For example, there have been reports that the White House in the US have been using generative AI tools to draft certain, and it leads to certain problems. Of course, there will be some rumble about it that people will disagree in the diplomatic and government communities, and there's a reason why they do it, right? Because um, you can't just use these tools for diplomacy and then say, yeah, they work in that sense. So, of course, that and then what are the technical AI biases? So, as I said, there's an ecosystem aspect of AI bias and there's a technical side of AI bias. Technical side, I will discuss a little less because it's about certain techniques and certain things. But then again, if that class of technology is it really employed in a specific way? Because right now, yes, there are some research papers which have been published on conflict mediation and AI and those things, but bias and AI research in this niche of diplomacy has not been done pretty well. But ecosystem wise, we have a lot of instances. So I'll definitely discuss that. Um, like in the case of Yemen, I think there is an interesting paper on our side around AI and diplomacy. And it's interesting, like how machine learning algorithms are being used to mediate in a situation as we are seeing in Yemen right now. I mean, it's an attempt, but of course, it's a use case of AI to some extent. I'm not saying it's a perfect one, but it's an interesting one. And the last one I wish to discuss is diplomatic approaches. Can we really have AI safety research and governance cooperation from a diplomacy angle? And why is it? I'll actually get on that. Because right now, and ironically, even under Donald Trump, this is not ending. In fact, the US is doubling down on this. All what they have done is just change terminology from AI safety to AI security. But AI safety is not going anywhere. In fact, there is a lot of global cooperation on AI safety. China is concerned about it, India is concerned about it, US is concerned about it. So I'll discuss those nitty gritties of international relations also. Since I understand the Indo-Pacific world and it's fun to talk about India-US relations, but of course not for the majority of the session. So, what is the nexus of AI and diplomacy? Like, why is it even required? I think we should ask this critically. The answer is diplomacy is an art, it's a practice, it has protocols. Of course, it's an aspect of political engagement. Private diplomacy also happens between businesses. They act as indirect envoys or indirect referring people. But in government aspects, you have people who are in diplomatic and consular services. That is one of the direct aspects of AI and diplomacy nexus, right? That in consular services, you automate certain services to analyze documents. You have OCR technology. You can check if they make sense and whether, and as per assumed protocol, can you know, review certain visa applications quickly. And yes, that is of course there. But I think one legal understanding that is important to come up, and that is something which is developing because that's taking time. And I'm talking from an international law point of view because I have my specialization in public international law as well. Is that we have to assume that AI systems, and when I say AI systems, it could be technology itself, the technique which is now working as a full-fledged system, as a product or a service, or something like an infrastructure. All of these are AI systems. The best example we can say is that perplexity for government. You involve perplexity, but you do give it to Singapore government or some government and say, oh, you know what, we are using it for diplomatic practices now, but you're using a rather more protected version where perplexity also has certain protocols, and I'm just assuming. And Singapore government is also giving confidential information, but it is redacted in a way so that obviously they can't process confidential stuff to AI of these days. So in that case, even if that is the assumption that generative AI systems are reliable, let us say, I mean, they're not reliable that much, then we can define that algorithms are diplomatic units. That they are units which are functioning as dependent units of diplomatic practices. And this is something which is a legal understanding clearly based on public international law, the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and the works of the International Law Commission. Now, why am I saying that? Because that is how the International Law Commission has always thought about diplomacy and diplomatic personnel. And this consensus has been there because jurists from India and jurists from many parts of the world actually are part of the ILC. And this has been indirectly justified in a lot of government literature also. So defining state practices these days, like what is a state practice in international law, diplomatically speaking, is very hard because politically speaking, either a judiciary does it like a court recognizes in comparative law in some way or the other, saying that you know what, this Canadian constitutional law judgment is good, or you have a bureaucrat or a particular minister who's acknowledging it in some way or the other, which is more formal, right? Maybe an MOU, maybe an agreement, maybe a treaty, but we are not in the times when we have treaties signed and ratified, right? Uh, I mean, we can't even sign a convention in the UN General Assembly. How can we do treaty diplomacy? So treaties are not happening, but diplomacy still is happening. There are a lot of bilateral engagements which happen among countries. So that's why I said dependent tuning of diplomatic practices, that they emulate and kind of have to be some emblematic of diplomatic practices. In fact, that reminds me, I think in Germany recently, Germany or one of the Scandinavian countries, they have recently come up with a large language model in healthcare, and it's open source. It's a multi-organization cooperation, collaboration, and they have done that. So that's interesting. Um, So that is one way to understand that they are dependent units. So if they are dependent units, what are the use cases of AI and diplomacy? So of course, I talked about Yemen. Uh, uh, I've come across that paper, but uh, of course, I think that paper needs to be given a hard look. But I can say that conflict prevention and even commercial mediation, these are two things where AI can be used. So there's kind of an unexplored potential which is about having a third party system which is giving a sense of neutrality for parties. But then the problem will come up, are you able to handle parties who already are conflict ridden and have their own power and resource dynamics? And are they going to agree with it? Can it really go for mediation that way? That's a hard thing. But even if that's not possible, in conflict ridden areas or in areas which are sensitive, um, from a law and order perspective. Of course, and if they are near the international borders, let us say, or something else is there that you have groups like West Asia, for example. West Asia is the best example of it, where it can be tried, even if it's failed. Uh, I'd request if anyone is there, I'm just looking at the slide. If they can mute themselves, I think it seems that it's echoing for some reason. So they can just mute themselves. Yeah. So, in that regard, of course, conflict prevention is there, and early warning systems are possible. You can use CCTV cameras and detect if there is a potential activity happening. You can use satellite images from reliable companies, and then you can, you know, uh, gain access, and then you can get some strategic understanding that at this particular timestamp that this has happened, and you know what, the forces have to be ready, something has to be done. And I think these are some of the ways where predictive analytics and AI can be used. So definitely that is helpful for state actors. Um, can it be done at a mass scale for multilateral engagement? I don't know, because you need the right vendor and you need to ensure that the technology is sustainable. So it's a long road ahead. Maybe some workflows can be agreed upon, but it's a long road ahead. Voting pattern analysis, yes, this has been tried in the case of UN General Assembly. Uh, but otherwise, I think voting pattern analysis is just awesome. Like, you analyze why India voted in this way, why China voted in this way in this particular UNGA committee, or why. But Security Council is hard to do because Security Council has their own private meetings, and I don't think that the way the credibility of Security Council is going down, nobody would employ AI that easily there for confidentiality and a lot of high stake reasons. But yeah, UN General Assembly, UNESCO, WHO, the World Health Assembly, these forums, maybe yeah, they can do. And that brings us to the other aspects, like what other aspects of AI and diplomacy are. So as I said about predictive algorithms, predictive analytics, um, conflict prevention is definitely there. But then again, there is an element of DPI, which everybody is talking about. In fact, this year after the Raisina dialogue in Delhi, ORF hosted a DPI conclave, if I'm right, which was hosted in the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan. Yeah. Interestingly, DPI and AI is also an element which governments are interested about, because you know what, everyone is doing e-governance these days. Estonia is obviously a pioneer in this as a small country. India is obviously successful with its DPI initiatives. There is no doubt about that. Um, but what happens is that um, I think the diplomacy nexus also comes legally, because let us say somebody is a diplomat in Chanakapuri, New Delhi, okay, or they have a consulate in Bombay, okay. I'm just assuming. I'm not naming anyone. I'm just giving an example. And that diplomat, you through their own personnel and their connects, reaches out to a local bureaucrat in India and says that, you know what, you are using this DPI. We want to offer AI tools. We will go through regulatory approvals. We will integrate them, and we will have some role in terms of diplomatic cooperation on data sharing and other things, maybe, so that we can effectively engage with you, because this particular element of involvement of AI with DPI is critical. So, does it involve diplomatic immunity under the VCDR, which is not even binding on India, but still India kind of respects the treaty? What will happen? Will administrative law clash with diplomatic immunity? Uh, will it affect the political governance of that particular country whose consulate is in India? What will happen? So I think yes, DPI and AI also will involve diplomacy aspects, because there's a lot of work on at bilateral level happening between countries. So that's also an area which has a lot of scope. And last but not the least, the nexus is sovereignty layer complexity. That there are three different layers of AI: application of AI, which is basically the tool that you're using. Maybe you might be making an AI survey right now. If there's an AI tool like Otter or something roaming around in this Zoom call, it might be making summaries of what I'm talking about. I don't know. So that is the application. But how is it doing it? Well, it is based on a data which has been trained upon, and it is also taking data from me as I'm speaking right now. So that is the data related to AI, and then the algorithmic infrastructure. So now it has got the data from me, from you, from others. How will it process it? Well, there is an algorithm which is already pre-trained and developed. Let's now ensure that the algorithm delivers results like, okay, summaries, um, explanations, interpretations, right? And the algorithmic infrastructure ensures that the data is churned out pretty well. So, but all of them have different governance approaches. For example, for application, you will have consumer law problems, competition law problems. You will have cybersecurity issues if it is not properly safe. With data, it's always about consent, privacy, okay, and these issues are very critical in a country like India and even across the world because India is an interesting exemplar. Like there's so much scope for foreign and Indian collaboration across businesses because interestingly they are interested, they're proposing that data localization should be done in India. That the data of Indian people, if processed by foreign companies, has to be in India, right? And that brings us to the concept of data visitation, which I will discuss later in this session if necessary. But you understand, right, that all of these layers have different governance and text and reality. So jurisdictional issues will come, and that's why I call it sovereignty layer complexity. Which brings us to the second part, normative emergence. Now we have talked about diplomacy, Indo-Pacific, governance, okay, data privacy, consent. Okay, fine, great. That's an interesting topic to discuss. That's an interesting question. But can technology practices like how exactly do you protect something? How do you ensure that certain safety protocols are adopted? How do you, uh, you know, process things? So I'll give you an example. Can they lead to norm creation? So all of you might know Microsoft, right? Everyone knows Microsoft. Of course, it's a big tech company, huge company, right? It's like Meta and Amazon and Netflix. And now, Microsoft, as a big company, like anyone, would have to engage with vendors across the globe. They have vendors, right? And they have a particular AI and data protection assessment policy or something like that. Turns out that as a company, Microsoft requires their vendors to comply with ISO 42001. Now, what is this standard? This is a standard on AI and knowledge management. What is knowledge management? Very simply speaking, you are a startup, you have corporate policy, you have certain documents which are the basis of your product, you have you have other legal documents, all of those kind of things, policies and those things which you agree at a company. And yes, you have because it can start with articles of association and companies act to something very basic like a consumer privacy policy or terms and conditions. And yes, you need those documents because that's how a startup is run. Even a kirana store has these things. Okay, so uh, let us say that you are engaging and you're utilizing these knowledge assets. How do you process them? How do you utilize their value, their business value and legal value? That is something Microsoft said that since we have so many vendors, if we are doing business with Microsoft, we as a vendor, we as vendors would have to adhere with Microsoft policy because that's how contracts work. Microsoft will say otherwise that if you don't agree with ISO 42001, I'm sorry, you can't do business. So you see, it was a market standard which was created by an organization called ISO. It was a non-binding standard. It is not binding anywhere. But turns out that even if it is not binding, you can still implement it and you can show that it is a market standard, correct? But it is about technology, right? So it's a technology practice and a market practice at the same time. Same happens in cybersecurity and hacking related things like ethical hacking, how to do ethical hacking. Um, Same happens in incident response protocol. Okay, so that is why the first idea, which is recursive norm formation. Technical decisions in AI systems gradually acquire normative significance through repeated practices. That you do certain practices and that creates a sense of a norm. And this is something which has been recognized in public international law and acts of diplomatic understanding as well. For example, um, in the past, while the US and the Soviet Union have had immense rivalries, we have seen that these two big giants actually had got a lot of important space law treaties agreed with. The space diplomacy has been happening between NASA and Roscosmos for a long time. Even during the Ukraine situation, which we can now say a Ukraine war, which is of course not a good situation for Ukrainians, the Roscosmos and NASA have still been cooperating despite the fact that under the Biden administration there were some instances that, you know what, NASA and Roscosmos might not cooperate. Despite the despite the treaty on ICBMs uh, being done over with, NASA and Roscosmos are collaborating. So what happens is that this shows that despite war, despite certain high-level situation where diplomats are not being given anything, nothing is happening, at least in public-facing circumstances, there is still some cooperation. There is still some possibility of a norm creation. So if we even take the US-Russia example, or let us take the Saudi-Iran example, or any example, or the India-China relations, which is one of the more versatile relations, interestingly, because we all know that we have a very tough position on China for our own strategic reasons and territorial sovereignty reasons, and even other strategic sovereignty reasons. But we still do business with China, right? Of course, China is not Pakistan and Pakistan is not China, but we know why we do, right? So some norm creation is always there. Um, and this is interesting because in non-information similarly happens in case of technology. Because I gave this IR analogy, assuming that a lot of you might not be from tech background. So that's why I give you an international relations analogy. That being said, of course, can these technical standards become legal standards? Yes, I told you the Microsoft example, which comes to the third point: digital geographical determinism. Can aspects of physical infrastructure, cultural competencies, and by cultural competencies, I mean work culture related competencies, skill culture related competencies, are we able to involve any form of automated practice which is aligning with our cultural practice? For example, the way a Japanese business works might not be as same as how a European business works. Their expectations might be different. Therefore, uh, just one request, if somebody can please mute themselves, the voice is somehow echoing from their end or something like that. That would be really helpful. Yeah. So now let us say that the Japanese and the Europeans are engaged. Okay? European diplomats have to be aware how exactly Japanese entities, Japanese diplomats, and Japanese businesses really have their concerns, right? Um, yeah, generally they are trained in this. They have to understand this, and same applies to people in Japan. They also have to understand what are the cultural competencies of Europeans. How do they respond? What are their particular ethics, right? What are their approaches? What are their protocols? And all of these are competencies, and I would say cultural because these are work culture related competencies. In the language of diplomacy, we call it, oh, this is protocol, this is a norm, this is how diplomats behave. Like for example, uh, an American media had long posted that for I think former foreign for, well that that a foreign secretary of India, former foreign secretary at that time because he's not a foreign secretary anymore. A former foreign secretary of India has issued a statement, a letter to embassy in Washington D.C., the Indian embassy in Washington D.C. about Pakistan and whatever. Okay, turns out a lot of IFS officers who read that, they said on social media and even beyond them when they were interviewed that okay, this seems to be AI generated, or even if it is not AI generated, it doesn't seem even real because it doesn't look like how an IFS officer writes. You see, protocol. So cultural competencies. So these are cultural competencies, and sometimes they are an integral part of our geographies. I don't think we discussed that very well. What happens is that yeah, we should regulate and we should govern like anything in a top-down way, but increasingly what is happening, and I did a very interesting session on behalf of ISIL for UNU, United Nations University, and we had stakeholders, and increasingly we agreed, and even before in the past, that the AI community is becoming decentralized each single day. Like some random guy who is an AI startup guy, or maybe a BTech student working in Singapore or India might develop an AI tool and bam, they go in a B2C, B2B context, and that's how the AI community is. It's not dominated by big tech as it used to be. Yes, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of networks, they have some of the best talent in the world, but they're still not able to build. So Yes, they might have physical infrastructure as well, which is true in the case of companies like X, led by Elon Musk. They have a huge uh, plant right now in Tennessee, uh, uh, um, and other places like Texas and all in the US, which actually is causing a lot of emissions, right? And yeah, the carbon emissions, and that's not good. So these things define larger geographic realities, and I think that's why normative emergence becomes important. That yes, it could be a technological standard, it is still global, but it is not the same as we assume. So that's true. Which brings us to three aspects: collective user assumptions, speciality challenges, and community driven standards. So, what is a collective user assumption? Well, as I said, cultural competencies among companies, among NGOs, if necessary, not for profits, industry associations, it matters. Okay, how do they behave? Even law firms, for that matter, because even law firms sometimes play a role in arbitration and all those matters. And yes, countries are concerned about that because if you are doing arbitration, can you have clauses which actually help both parties? And yes, it can be a diplomatic issue that if India and some Scandinavian country are doing something, can Scandinavian countries cut some slack and even India can cut some slack and say, you know what, okay, let's enable a more friendly dispute resolution environment for Indian companies in my Scandinavian country. And so can India say, you know what, we are reforming these laws in the parliament, or we're coming up with a particular guidance note, which is making ADR even simpler. So yes, you can use diplomacy to involve dispute resolution reforms. And so it's a win-win for both countries. That's also one of the ways. There are other forms of ADR also, informally speaking, which can be agreed at a diplomatic level. Either you can do it through industry associations. So that is also diplomacy, right? Technically, this is also diplomacy. Um, so collective user assumptions matter a lot. That's a core of diplomacy. That's a core of international engagement. A speciality challenge. Um, uh, Location independence is an interesting aspect. For example, you require energy supply for data centers so that your compute works. Now, these two things can be in different parts of the world, and then your data servers can be in different, can be maybe with the same power source because it has to be. But then again, your application where it is being spread, the AI application, the AI product service, where the customer or the client base is, let us say, it is in Dubai, the data center is in India, but the compute to which all the processing is happening might not be the same place. So location independence exists. Okay, you can code a product in India and sell it in Dubai. Nobody is stopping you. Of course, there are data protection laws in Dubai. You have to adhere with them because you have Dubai-based people. But despite that location independence, you still have to adhere with UAE's laws. So yes, speciality is challenging. Geographical factors matter. That's how we come up with some regulatory and governance questions. And not all questions are unreasonable. Some questions are genuine. Um, uh, and that comes us to community-driven standards. Like I said, when collective user aspirations and assumptions come up, then we should ask, are community-driven standards important? That's what associations like the US Chamber of Commerce literally do. Okay? Even in India, we have ASSOCHAM, NASCOM, CII, and all of these organizations. But all of these have their own role, 50, right? All of these. And and we have in the IT side, we have, of course, IMI and all this. In the AI side, there are a few organizations like AI for India and all, and we have there as I fail, but that's a different story altogether. And that's where we come to international algorithmic law, which is again a question mark is there, and there's a question mark because this is a field which I had proposed in 2020. Now, what is this field all about? Is this a branch of diplomacy and law? Yes. Is it a branch of technology law? Yes. Is it about technology policy? Yes, because it involves diplomatic practices. So, what exactly is international algorithmic law? Very simply speaking, it's about diplomatic, individual, and economic transactions, which is totally around algorithms. Simple. Because we have to understand that if we look at the technology evolution of artificial intelligence, then even if generative AI and large language models fail, which is inevitable considering the new research that has come from University of Arizona, Apple Machine Learning Research, Subbarao Kambhampati, who's ex-president of AI, and so many relevant places, I don't think LLMs are going to survive. And but that doesn't mean that AI is done over with. I don't think AI has lost. AI hasn't lost. AI will continue. Some form of automation will continue. In fact, we are making genuine advancements in robotics, which will be helpful in so many ways for the defense sector, for the automobile sector, for the manufacturing sector. So I don't think robotics is going away because Gen AI is there. Robotics has been there for more than 40 years, like 50, 60 years. Boston Dynamics is one of the companies. So that's why I believe that international algorithmic law will come up someday. It doesn't have to be based on some international treaty. It doesn't have to be based on some, you know, maybe it will be based on diplomatic cooperation. We already have some elements of soft law right now, like UN Global Compact, which is also one of the ways why the UNU Global AI Network is so much involved in AI governance related issues. So that is the international algorithmic law. It involves diplomatic, individual, and economic transactions. And the reason I use the word transaction is that it is a transactional world. So it is a realistic in the lingo of international relations. It's a realistic, not uh, a moralist, structuralist, or idealistic. Which is why this keyword is also important for all of you to understand, which is data-centric cyber sovereignty. All technology policy, even AI diplomacy issues will start with data. But then it will stem up that, you know what, how will algorithms or automation be used and why does it matter? Which brings us to the second, third, and fourth aspects that there is a de facto political basis of this field which is possible. There are three aspects which are very important. I think I've discussed some of them already, like economic reliance. Um, Smaller countries in Africa, for example, they still have to rely on GPTs and all those things. But yes, there are some African startups which are trying to raise funds and come up with sustainable AI startups, which can ensure more AI sovereignty. Now, why do I say AI sovereignty? Because even if you take the best understanding of sovereignty in terms of tech, the European Union itself means that, and this is as per the literature of the European Commission, that technology sovereignty is about sovereignty of the individual who is an EU citizen, that is a natural person in the EU. And by that, I don't mean a refugee, but literally an EU citizen, like somebody from France or Austria or Germany. Same in the case of India. Sovereignty is very simple. For example, you have farmers in Tamil Nadu or farmers in East, Western Uttar Pradesh. They wish to know if rain is going to happen or what is the weather pattern. Now, there is a there is geospatial technology embedded with satellite. The satellite is getting images of the particular agricultural land in Western Uttar Pradesh. I'm making an example here, and they gather data. Okay, a lot of data can be gathered: heat waves, weather patterns, wind patterns. Okay, moisture, a lot of things, right? Now, from a sovereignty point of view, people can say that you're using algorithms to process a lot of sensitive data there, but it's not necessarily sensitive because it's non-personal. Should you not give back to those farmers of Western Uttar Pradesh just because the company is in Singapore and it's making money out of selling the data and the algorithmic services and solutions to it, right? Should you not give back some money back to them? So yes, technology makes things more transactional. That is the nature of technology. Um, and therefore, yes, economic reliance is a big question because those farmers might need those results too, so they might have to pay for it if they don't get it for free. So they have to rely on that, right? Another aspect of the algorithm dependency is Adobe Firefly. Artists using AI to build something. Turns out Adobe and Instagram have some agreement, and Instagram kind of tags your content as an AI content in the name of deep fake finding. I know deep fakes have to be captured, but turns out they're trying to demonetize creators and give them money back to Adobe or something like that. I don't know. So my point is, if that's also a possibility, where will the artist go? Where will a creator go? Will they use Adobe as a reliable vendor for their, you know, um, for their software that they need for creating animation or anything? So that's why even companies like Canva will be on the radar if they do something like. So yes, algorithm dependency is a huge issue, which brings us to algorithmic hegemony. Companies like OpenAI have ChatGPT, whose 60% user base, I think as of 2024 was from India. I think it will be a little bit more because Indians are just exploiting ChatGPT for free, asking random questions. They might also be copying this content which have then they'll put it and say, okay, what has the speaker said? Yeah, they might do that. So what has happened is that it's a form of hegemony in some way or the other because it's a resource aspect and obviously it's there. But how much hegemony are we talking about? Because even in China, for example, as opposed to public perception, I think the US and China AI competition is the same right now. It's not much different. The Chinese are doing well, but not all companies. Even a lot of companies in China are struggling in AI and Gen AI. They say that they are Gen AI companies, but yeah, China Mobile, a PSU in China, public sector undertaking, is kind of doing some innovation in AI and telecom and otherwise. But except smaller companies like DeepSeek and Alibaba and a lot of Chinese companies are not doing well. So, state industry relationships matter a lot. We think in India that China is doing way better than US on AI. Yes, some of the innovations are there, like DeepSeek R1, and DeepSeek has come up with a new model. But recently, just a few days ago. But that doesn't mean that the game is over because it's a resource economics thing and it's also about technology. So de facto political basis stems from these aspects, which brings us to anthropomorphic analysis requirements. Now, when you're using these AI tools, they make you feel as if they are a part of your life. In fact, there's a show you should watch on Apple. I will recommend it, Apple TV, called Sunny. Very interesting show from Japan, like how an American comes to Japan and how a robot, which is a self-care, self-help robot, kind of impersonates in such a way that it makes you feel that it's a part of your life and you can't do anything without. But ironically, a lot of chatbots actually try to give you that feeling. So yes, if you have watched Black Mirror, you should watch that show as well. In that being said, I think even the Hindi cinema has come up with something recently on this. But that being said, coming back to this, a lot of these generative AI technologies can create problems in diplomacy, and I'll get on that later because last part is very simple about intersection. Because what happens with these technologies is that when you involve them, they create a perception that they understand human perception, they understand human thinking, but they are just giving responses which are based on pattern matching. And therefore, the way they analyze things, for example, if I ask an AI system that is this X item available, okay? If it is not available on Google search or any form of searching, data scraping, it will not be able to tell why exactly it did come to conclusion that this thing is there. I have tried it before. I just can't share the screen and show the screenshots here. I forgot to do that, but you know, that's there. Which is why trust erosion comes in, and that's why I changed the slide quickly to come on commercialization. That trust erosion through AI slop is a reality because when you uh, proliferate AI slop, that is AI generated content which is not reliable, you are deeply affected. You can have fake tax invoices. You can have fake diplomatic statements, creating confusion among people. And yeah, it also affects people to people ties. I'll get on AI bias. That's why later. And yes, it is definitely something which affects information warfare because it fuels it. It causes information overload. And yes, as we have seen in the case of Chinese state-sponsored media, when they made claims about biological weapon labs, that was a bit of a shaky thing that created a problem which was something avoidable. So yes, there are other aspects of information warfare as well which could happen. For example, there has been a rise of videos through VO3 by Google, which features fake videos and they still look fake. They don't look real, by the way, and they will never work in theaters. They can't even work for OTT platforms. But they are so fake, they give a real-ish feeling that oh, floods have happened in a city. But when you look at the video, they don't, right? So unless the government and diplomatic personnel is well prepared and well equipped in understanding if these technologies are causing hype or misleading, it can make them take decisions which are not enough. So yes, and yeah, I'm 100% sure that intelligence communities are being benefited by this as well. There is no doubt about it. Intelligence agencies have been accused in the past to access Twitter data before Elon Musk came in, and even later, who knows? So yes, it affects diplomatic cooperation in some way or the other, which comes to the question of export controls. However, I'm not going to cover export controls that much because under the Trump administration, the export controls have been removed. But yes, it was a problem. Certain countries had certain access, certain countries can't access beyond 10,000 GPUs, which is why nobody is still telling how many GPUs did GDP use. Because all the public information that comes is, oh, 2,000 GPUs. That's not true. We just don't know. Because somebody claims it's 10,000, somebody claims 20,000, somebody claims 50,000 GPUs. But if you disclose, of course, at that time, the Trump administration or the Biden administration would have taken action. But I think when DeepSeek was released, R1, I think it was the Trump administration. Yeah, the swearing in happened later. So, you know, export controls are an interesting thing. Maybe it can happen in future. We don't know. Public-private partnership is definitely one of the things where DPI also comes with. Singapore is already doing with Google Cloud. Um, and Italy has recently done a ban of ChatGPT, which they revoked also. So that's definitely about commercialization and how it affects and changes aspects of political engagement and public diplomacy. Which brings us to the main aspect of this session, which is I'm getting quickly before I get into Q&A, which is technical AI bias. What is technical AI bias? As I told you that sometimes the technology itself is not present to do such things, and that is true. But then again, cultural representation matters because cultural competencies are also sometimes driven by the culture we are talking about. Like a lot of AI ethics codes, a lot of AI ethics reports by think tanks, research firms, management firms, law firms, government organizations, you name it, and private firms of communities. Nearly 82% have originated from weird countries, which means Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic countries. So they don't understand how Africans think. They don't understand how the Chinese think. They don't understand how Indians think. They don't understand any of these perspectives. And it's not about language or it's not about whether privacy is a universal concept. Okay, there are certain concepts in AI ethics which are pretty universal. For example, accountability, limited accountability. Are you accountable for some level of oversight? Maybe, maybe not. Is transparency in data needed? Yes, it is possible, especially in the case of hospitals and healthcare data. So this is a universal concept. Privacy. Do you have a right to privacy? Yes. Why? Well, it turns out that you have something called the International Convention on civil and political rights, ICCPR 1956, which has been agreed by a lot of UN member states. I think 100 plus UN member states, including India, long back in the non-aligned movement era. So yes, you can invoke some treaties in certain way, and their invocation is actually possible, but it depends how do you do it. That being said, skill-related realities, certain diplomatic couture, certain consistencies about protocols and respect, and understanding how work and skill culture really is around diplomatic communities and business communities is something which AI doesn't understand, and this is a huge problem right now. For example, in 2021, Meta came up with Cicero. Cicero is a neurosymbolic AI tool which was inspired by diplomacy.net game. You should play this game, by the way, for free, diplomacy.net. Like you can do some diplomacy in Europe right now if you play that game. Like how from Eastern Europe and Turkey you can go up and capture certain territories. And this AI tool was asked to do that. What happened? It was accurate to an extent. It was working within the rules of the game, but then turns out that AI fails because when it does that, it actually breaks the rules itself. So that is not even generative AI, which is based on too much vomiting of data. That's like total logical AI representation to neurosymbolic AI, and yet even that failed because, I mean, other reasons. It takes time. But it was a great technological achievement for 2021. So I think that, yes, cultural representation still matters. Yes, there are universal concepts that anyone would agree with, but still there are cultural representations. Stereotypical visualizations, therefore, also come, which is about representing Delhi as filthy, which it might or might not be, but I'm not getting on that point, or any place as anything, or specific eyelid shape for Chinese women, and all of these things are there, right? Or depicting that all of Japan is just Tokyo and Osaka, or something like that. Or all of Europe is just France, which is not true. European culture is also pretty diverse, with some similarities. This kind of affects people to people relations, right? It can also manipulate people who are working at a lower level in immigration offices, right? I think recently it happened with the US immigration system that they made certain changes that social media profiles have to be made public for scanning of visa applications and all that stuff. So theoretical visualizations can mess up certain things and it can create controversy. Global South exclusion. That is like a given. That is a problem right now that the Global South doesn't have enough representation and that causes problems. Definitely. And this is based on a survey. This is from my book, Normative, Emergence in Cyber Geographies. So this is actually a quotation from there. I wish I would have added the source also, but the source is in my book, recent book which came in. And yeah, it has business to business impact in some way or the other. But I don't think the impact is big right now, to be very fair. But yes, it can manipulate some mentality aspects. It can manipulate the way people think and make decisions. So that is definitely a risk. Is it a catastrophic risk? No, to be very fair. So that's there. There's one more example which one should know that Kenya in Africa had recently banned AI initiatives like WorldCoin. Well, this was a fantastic, or let us say, ambitious project started by Sam Altman from OpenAI because they had surveillance concerns. Because because a lot of African countries are not happy with certain Chinese initiatives right now. So China helps them build their diplomatic enclaves. Okay, they provide certain solutions for their public sector stuff. Okay, like CCTV cameras, um, facial recognition for certain reasons. Okay, and China doesn't respect data protection at all. They just their companies and their gongos, which is well a form of NGO, but government operated non-governmental organization or gongos as they say, they literally extract data. They don't respect the individual sovereignty of an African citizen in Kenya or Zambia or Nigeria, right? So that's why Kenya was so. And people were concerned even in South Africa and other countries that their data doesn't matter. They're it's just been taken away for the sake of it. So yeah, of course, African countries are not speaking up that much, but they are concerned about it. That is definitely visible. So it definitely fragments international cooperation. Why would anyone trust a treaty from Europe or US or from Council of Europe or I don't know NATO countries? Why would anyone trust in Africa? Nobody cares. So yes, it can create government to government tensions in some way or the other. And the last one is a pretty obvious one, which is language model bias. So yes, it affects cross-cultural diplomatic understanding. I think I've discussed a lot of it before about business communities and their couture and those. And so we come to the last part, and then we'll have Q&A quickly, which is diplomatic approaches for AI safety research and governance cooperation. Can this be done? Can diplomacy be assured in the AI times? Maybe, maybe not. Is it possible? Yes. Is it not possible? Yeah, both of them. Because we are not in the age of binding law. We are not in the age. The problem right now is there are two kinds of laws always: domestic laws and international law. Okay, for international law you have treaties. The problem is nobody wants to agree on a treaty on AI safety. Why? We have all these AI safety institutes which are coming up in different countries, from Ukraine to European countries, in Western and Central Europe, to United States under NIST, which is AI Security Institute, to India's own AI Safety Institute in collaboration with IIT Jodhpur and others. And China has one. Japan has an AI Safety Institute for sure. Singapore has it, and, and and they don't want binding standards at all. So yes, they do all these meetings in Europe and Canada and all these places, but they are agreeing on soft law measures which are flexible, self-regulating, right? So yes, it may be possible, it may not be possible, but it is a hard journey to go because domestic laws and regulation are creating a lot of compliance costs, and sometimes their purpose of enforcement is not clear, which creates further problems. This is why I said that maybe and maybe not. That yes, it could be possible that cooperation is happening, and it could be possible that cooperation is not. This is why issue-specific governance is the key for the future. At the same time, cultural competency recognition is also important. And then when I say cultural competency, yes, I have written here that it's about Western-centric frameworks and all, but it's also about documenting real skill and real work-related realities, which are kind of cultural as a part of it. Like some people will respect that, yeah, you talk only on 9 to 5. Some people will take some time because they are on leave or they have certain methods and protocols, but they matter. That makes us human, right? Because diplomacy at the end of the day is also human, even if political. And I think a lot of people who are proposing AI diplomacy using AI tools are not understanding that AI and diplomacy is about the human and political element of human beings. You just can't remove that. You have to ensure that the technology adapts to that and there are safeguards for it. That's why cultural competency recognition matters, which brings us to whole of government frameworks. India AI Mission is already interested in whole of government approach. The Digital India Act had this thing, but never implemented. We don't even have a bill right now. The United Kingdom has a cross-government strategy, and even Singapore has GovTech coordination right now happening under their initiative. So that is whole of government approach, which is possible that multiple ministries, agencies, and departments cooperate. But again, what to cooperate on, how to cooperate is still clear, but what to cooperate is not. Which brings us to regulatory arbitrage. When regulations are conflicting with each other, it will create unsustainable business requirements. Honestly speaking, it will do that. And that is something which is not good for AI innovation. That's not good for AI ethics and privacy realities because you will not be able to protect data then. So you are in a lose-lose situation. You're getting nothing. You're not even making good business. You're not even having a compliant ecosystem. You're not even ensuring sovereignty. You're not even ensuring anything. because everything is bypassed. Therefore, regulatory arbitrage. So, yes, I think the future is maybe focus on market and technical standards which are agreed upon among developers, data scientists, senior solution architects, AI researchers, those kind of people. Otherwise, mere top-down understanding of regulation and imposing a treaty, these features will fail further, and the relevance of technologies might also be affected or not, but it will definitely expose the way regulatory thinking has been for a long time. Which is why technical standard harmonization is one of the very quicker ways to achieve better AI governance. Better to solve a problem rather than just keeping it, isn't it? With this, thank you. I hope that I made it a bit interesting and it was not a tirade, but I'm open to take up questions as it may be possible. So please. So, are there any questions, first? I'll be happy to address them. Um, Arsh, are you there?
Yes, sir.
By any chance? Yeah. Are there any questions? Like, I think we can now take up questions. I mean,
Yeah, if there are any other questions, participants can either put them in the chat box or they can unmute themselves and ask.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And if you have permitted them to unmute themselves, that's up to you. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what we do in every session, that they unmute themselves and ask. So we can wait for 5 minutes. Like they might be typing the chat or something. So
Perhaps, perhaps. Yeah. Let's wait for a few minutes. Yeah. I don't
yeah.
know.
So there's one question in the chat box by Jules Thomas. He says, given that diplomatic decisions can have global consequences, how can international legal frameworks and multilateral institutions be strengthened to ensure that AI tools used in diplomacy are audited for bias and held to ethical standards across jurisdictions?
This is an interesting question because it's about existing frameworks instead of coming up with a new framework. I'll address that. And meanwhile, of course, people can come up with the other questions. Um, so I think we have existing frameworks. Some of them work, some of them don't. And one of the best ways forward is acknowledge and reform some aspects of the older institution. Make sure that you respect sovereign equality of UN member states, considering that United Nations is still the biggest multilateral forum right now with its own agency. And um, auditing for bias is something which can happen by limiting the engagement of AI and then ensuring that the technology method used is having its own limited value. I think that's the most important aspect of it. I think This is not something which cannot be agreed at bilateral, trilateral, and plurilateral level. If that enough is understood, then of course, whatever the committee is, whatever the forum is, you can try to enforce existing obligations so that there is some diplomatic clarity, and that can create some very positive governance norms at an international level. I think another question is there by Shah. Nisha. Um, in situations where AI systems used in diplomacy reinforce historical and geographical biases, what mechanisms can be introduced to detect incorrect patterns in the compromising this strategic interest? Interestingly, well, I don't know how do they reinforce historical or geopolitical biases. Maybe you're just referring to AI generated text uh, created tools like those which come up with systems and all. Because when we say historical and geopolitical biases, say that we have a we have a uh, China and Denmark perspective. Okay, um, and Denmark, for example, hasn't faced what India has faced. So let us say, for assumption that Denmark might not have a perspective which India has right now, are we saying that the nuances and the justification is something which affects? I don't think so. We are not there yet because these tools are not that advanced. But reinforcement of biases can happen by obviously some word salad, that is by virtue of research. So maybe we can say that in that sense your question makes sense. But then again, I think for that one just has to avoid using AI related conversational bots in diplomatic actions if their purpose is not specific. There are other questions as well. So, yeah,
There's one more question from Akshar. How can diplomats and policy makers be trained to critically analyze AI assistance in negotiations, especially when there is not accountability behind those inputs?
that's a very interesting question. I think it's related to the first one as well. And I think diplomats and policy makers first need to question vendors, and they need to understand how to question vendors and how to understand vendor dynamics and tech dynamics. They don't need to be PhD in AI. They don't need to be some MBA. If they are, well, congratulations. We need more educated policy makers and diplomats. If these diplomats are considered to be educated because they pass through some civil service exams across the world, not just India, even in Japan and other places. But for political people, I think education is not a ground. What is basically a ground is that they need to understand if vendors are making sense in their transactional obligations, whether that is justifiable. They have to be prepared for it um, by understanding their business logic. I think vendors are not trying to explain technologically how exactly their AI system works and what could be the possible limitations. But from a tech and data governance point of view, I think reinforcing existing data governance standards, which don't require a data protection regulation, you just can go through some older data governance market standards. I think understanding that at a basic level also is helpful for policymakers. So these are some of the basic things uh, for addressing model input and output. So I hope that helps.
There's one more question by Arun Mishra. Given unequal access to AI technologies among nations, how can we prevent bias as well as ensure a framework for equal access?
Honestly, equal access is something which is a very hard opportunity. Even if you look at telecom sector, the ITU came up with the Tunis agenda, right? The World Summit for Information Society of 2005 and 2004. Um, there has been some growth, but unlike telecom and broadcasting networks, where companies like Deutschcom, Airtel, all of these companies come in, some inclusion approaches have been adopted because even if these are monopoly companies or PSUs, they still had sustainable technologies in terms of delivery. They had optical fibers which actually enabled tech access and digital access, right? But even if we say that yes, there is unequal access to AI technologies and even AI related research related resources like compute and all, I think we need to wait because uh, the way LLM hype is going down and the way technological relevance is being addressed, like honestly speaking, a company like Apple will be considered more reliable than OpenAI, and I'll give you a reason why. A company like Apple has filed patents on multiple things. Okay, Amazon, for all its being an e-commerce and OTT giant, has also filed a patent and got it approved on natural language processing, which is an AI technique. So I'd rather trust Amazon's AI research and Microsoft and maybe Apple over OpenAI because OpenAI is just a new player which has just come up recently. Yes, they were a research organization for a long time, but they're just focusing on generative AI. And since the bet is on large language models, I don't think that unequal access should be an issue. Yes, but I think more issues can be about data centers and semiconductors. I think that's the thing, but I think um, the US is not going to enforce export controls. They're already been struck back. The Trump administration is not going there. They're just focusing on contracts. So, okay, more questions. That's good actually. I think that's very encouraging. I mean, I was assuming nobody would ask, but so nice. So I think we are at whose question? um, I think,
So Rohini Kulshresht has asked a question out of that. Uh, in,
right.
scena- in scenarios where AI systems are a replication of historical inequalities, such as language priority, how can such biases be overcome?
Yeah. So language is a good question because language models rely on text output. Um, uh, in those cases, uh, it's pretty clear that language models can still be addressed by either ignoring them or coming up with better data sets. Because right now it's also about quality data sets. Okay. Uh, Meta has an open source model which is Llama 4 or Llama 3, and they have already peaked. Uh, uh, they are good, but they don't have quality data. Even Elon Musk today has assumed that and realized that Grok doesn't have quality data. And where does he get it from? Well, Twitter, X, right? The platform where everyone speaks in anything. People speak in multiple languages. People also speak in dialects like Bhojpuri and whatnot, right? So, so quality data is not there. So I think companies like Sarvam AI, Jhana, and others actually have an upper hand right now in India in the inferencing side of it. So that's the answer. I'll be a bit short now because there might be a repetition of it. I think it is somebody called iMac.
Probably
Yeah.
somebody must have forgotten to change their name. Uh,
Possibly, possibly, possibly.
yeah.
Current government.
Yeah.
Okay, so question is: are there current governments in the world who have employed the use of AI and are there are enough safeguards to ensure? So you can start with data governance and intellectual property related treaties. So there has been an assumption for a long time that intellectual property treaties like TRIPS should be removed so that every AI company can process any data across the world. Okay, then why didn't you do it for vaccines and COVID? Why was India pushing so hard? There was a reason, right? So if you can, you were not easy to do for vaccines to WTO and WHO. Why are you so keen to do it for AI data? Huh? Because you want to make money. Well, turns out you can handle revenues, but you don't even have quality data anymore. So um, I don't think it helps in that sense. And uh, Safeguards are possible by existing data governance practices from beginning. And yes, there are some data. I mean, more countries are coming up with data protection laws. So I think you start with that. You start with basic cybersecurity practices, incident response practices, which are the most practical way right now. I think yes, there's some cooperation which is possible. But awareness should not be taken as a ground that people are not aware, so they are just totally like naive. That is also not true. I mean, awareness should not be a ground to avoid any commercialization, but it should be a way that yes, you should have a right to AI literacy. I think that should be a universal right at this moment. This thing I think can be universalized, right to AI literacy, because this is something which everyone will need eventually. You will use some automation in some way or the other. You're already using it for credit cards. You're already using it in fintech. You're already using it in hospitals. Why will you not have it? So I think right to AI literacy is one of the best ways on this question. Um, uh, Rohan, Rohan, your question is nice. To what extent can these tools be subject to international legal frameworks? I think I've answered that kind of in the session that having a global treaty might not be helpful. Yes, some countries might be a bit curious, like Council of Europe came up with this treaty on AI and Singapore was a bit interested. But I don't think that enforcement of a global treaty is easy, because even if you do it, there are some capacity related challenges. And problem is right now the discourse is that nobody is taking feedback from businesses, startups, AI researchers properly across the world, not just India, across the world. So everyone is suggesting their own policy, and that's causing confusion. So I don't know if a global treaty is possible, but I think UNESCO had an AI recommendation, and that's a great achievement. That's not a binding thing, but that's still a great recommendation, because the Indian Council of Cultural Relations had submitted an interesting submission to UNESCO as well. So you can check that up actually. I've written it for Analytics India magazine like in 2021 on this. I don't have the link right now with me, but I would have shared with you. So thank you for your question, Rohan. Priyambak has a question. Follow up from previous question: how can smaller and lesser developed safeguard and diplomatic interest when engaging a largely trained? So that applies to China as well. For example, China is a global north country. And Priyambak has a very nice question. Chinese companies are exploiting Nigerians and Zambians and others in Africa, right? Why? Because their CCTV cameras involve algorithms which analyze people's faces and predictive patterns. You are exploiting that much data and you don't even care for consent or anything. And how is the government allowing that in Africa initially is also a problem with African nations, which is their own issue. But my point is that I think um, this can be addressed when at least smaller and underdeveloped nations at least have data protection laws. Start with that. Start with that. Start with cybersecurity legislation. Um, Enforce your copyright and patent regime pretty well. These are basic things to start with. Then you go for high-level AI governance for certain class of systems involving AI in health, involving AI in disaster management. In fact, that's actually possible. I think, and then yes, diplomatic cooperation will happen. All of these countries will have their own chamber of commerce or something, and they will have some diplomatic engagements. And yes, that could help. So start with data protection laws right away. I think you don't need to come up with a high-level data protection law, but even if something basic comes up, that is actually a very good stepping stone right now. So by the way, I'm very happy that unlike other sessions that sometimes I do, people ask questions but they don't ask too much. But I'm so happy that so many questions were asked. But maybe we can wait for 2 more minutes. I think I will address a lot of questions
Sure,
already.
so no problem.
Yeah. I think we had enough questions for
Yes,
now. No?
I believe nobody else is asking. So
It's fine. Yeah.
thank you so much, sir, for taking out time from a busy schedule and coming here. It was a delight learning from you, understanding this very topic, and we'd love to have you again in one of our sessions in the future. Thank you so much to all the participants for asking questions. Thank you, sir, for resolving the queries. Thank you so much. See you all tomorrow. Good night.
Thank you.